Our next speaker is Ina Fandrich. She holds a doctorate in history from Temple, and she's now going to talk to us about an incredibly important aspect of this battle that has for far too long been overlooked, and that's the history of free men of color in the Battle of New Orleans. And without any further ado, Ina Fandrich.
The free people of color in the Battle of New Orleans. And this time I'm going to mention two secret weapons that Andrew Jackson had on in his favor. And I was delighted to hear the previous speaker who kind of prepared for what I'm going to come up with in a way. He did not mention the variables that I'm about to propose, but they come at the end of the lecture. Okay. So while our friend Sam spoke on Thursday about the forgotten general, at some point, Admiral Cochrane, I'm going to mention at some point a forgotten engineer. Okay, the past 2 years, I had the great honor and privilege to participate in this annual symposium, while last year, just about every historical institution in the region had a symposium for the bicentennial. Here at Nunes College, this is not a one-time shot, but an annual affair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Manning and the organizing committee for putting together another wonderful symposium, and also to express a big thank you for bringing me back again. Exactly, they deserve it. Thank you all for doing such a wonderful job. I was especially impressed with Michelle Miner, the singer. Wow, I never knew what a great voice she has. Okay, that's for all who were here on Thursday. Okay, long before General Colin Powell became the commander-in-chief of the US troops in Iraq and later served as the first African-American Secretary of State of the United States of America, we already had black men serving our country. So in my previous 2 lectures, I tried to clean up a common misconception. Somehow many people claim that the War of 1812, and more precisely the Battle of New Orleans, was the first time when black soldiers fought for the United States in combat. So we know now that's not true. Neither for Louisiana nor for the United States. In Louisiana, black troops had been deployed in every conflict the region ever faced, whether during the French colonial, the Spanish colonial, or American rule. Their bravery always stood out. As for the United States, several thousand African American soldiers already fought in the Continental Army against the British during the American Independence War. And yes, they too were already deployed in combat, and contributed thus to the very existence of this great nation. So nevertheless, the United States seems to somehow suffer from a bad case of recurring public amnesia. War after war, whether it is the War of 1812, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, each time when it begins, we seem to have forgotten that there had always been great black soldiers fighting for us. And hence, there should be absolutely no reason to worry that they, by some reason, wouldn't perform as well or be less brave as white soldiers. But I don't know if time after time, we know what happened. These black soldiers, as soon as the United States took over the territory, Claiborne came, our first governor, and first disbanded them. They were already there. So, you know, Deja vu. Finally, since the Vietnam War, we as a nation seem to have finally recovered from this insidious mental malfunction and stopped discriminating against some of our best warriors. So this is not going on, thank God. Oh well. No, the 2 all-black battalions of free men of color, roughly about 600 soldiers, were not the first black American soldiers in combat. And at that, as Andrew Jackson noticed immediately, they were a particularly impressive group of soldiers. Okay, 2 years ago, I also examined 2 prominent cases of free people of color who participated in the war effort of 1814, 1815. Surprise, surprise, neither one of them turns out to be a free man of color. Okay, here we have Marie Laveau. She was probably just 13 when she served, probably as a nurse in the war. We don't know. We don't have any data on her war effort. This is just a few data about her. But we have her second husband. The first one disappeared shortly after they got married, like 2 or 3 years later. But this one here, she lived with for 3 decades. They were very happily together. And he was known as Captain Christoph Glapion. That was his nickname, Captain. So everybody that lived with them, even in her obituary in 1881, said that the man was another free man of color like her first husband, whoops, here, Jacques Paris, and that he was black, a free man of color. He was, thank you, he was also from Saint-Domingue and was supposed to be a captain. Oops. When I went in the archives are dangerous, none of that is true. He was not black. He was a white man. His grandfather was a Chevalier de Saint-Louis. That means he was a nobleman who served in the French army under the French king, came here as a French soldier towards the end of the French colonial time, and they've been ever since here. The Glapions, no, he's totally from Louisiana, not from Haiti. He is white, of white nobility, and he did not serve as a captain. He was a private, got only $8 a month. So now that, all these facts, that does not prevent the state of Louisiana to give, well, since he was white and she was black, they had to somehow figure out what they tell their children. So they told their children, because they want them to believe that they're legitimate and black and white couldn't get married. So they told their kids that they both are black. You see, anyone can pass for black in the state of Louisiana. So the two passed for black, and their kids, well, at least in their community. Legally, he never went as far to claim that he was black. But he died in 1855. In the 1870s, Marie Laveau finally was eligible to apply for a pension. And interestingly, the state of Louisiana granted her request. She did get a pension from the state of Louisiana as the legal wife of Christopher Glapion, because everybody knew her and him. But then when she did her application with the federal government, oops, they returned it to her. They denied her application on 2 strange reasons. Number 1, they claimed they couldn't find his record. Number 2, and ultimately the main justification, she was a voodoo queen and therefore not eligible for a pension. Go figure. I didn't know about that kind of legal situation. Okay, now here we have the reenactments from last year. It was pretty cold. We have a nice lady reenacting one of those free ladies of color that served, or maybe an enslaved lady. And maybe Marie Laveau was serving food and not a nurse, but she was a trained healer, so we don't know. They also said she made the best gumbo in town, so maybe she helped out here like these young ladies did, so we don't know. The second case I mentioned was the drummer, Andrew Jackson's legendary drummer boy, Jordan Noble. He showed incredible bravery in the Battle of New Orleans at the tender age of only 14 years. He was listed as the property and enslaved servants in the muster roll of his owner. So no, he was not a free man either. And he remained enslaved for many years to come after the War of 1812. So much for Andrew Jackson's promise that that enslaved servants who joined the war effort would be set free by war's end. Broken promises. All right. Now, Noble served our country in yet several more wars including the Mexican-American War, before he was finally free. Thankfully, he had many years to enjoy his freedom. He was fortunate enough to live to the ripe old age of 92. Later in his life, he became a major celebrity in the annual debate of New Orleans commemorative parades when war veterans marched through the streets of the city. Last year, during the bicentennial celebrations, we had an enormously moving ceremony for Andrew Jackson's famous drummer boy, Jordan Noble. It took place at the historic St. James AME Church in Tremé. After the ceremony in the packed church, we proceeded in a joyful second-line parade from there to his tomb to lay down a wreath at his gravesite in St. Louis Cemetery number 2. If you want to find it, there's a big plaque on his tomb. Hundreds of reenactors in full uniform joined this memorable procession. Some of Jordan's descendants, both from here in New Orleans and the West Coast, also participated. The whole event was organized and coordinated by community historian Al Jackson, who also gave a keynote address at the church. I have to admit, this event was for me the highlight of the bicentennial celebrations. You see, at a time when Americans across the country assert that Black lives matter, here we were, some locals, some visitors, but mainly historical reenactors from as far as Canada, England, and even Australia. Almost all of them white men in historical uniforms representing both sides of the battle lines. All of us gathered on this sunny and rather cold winter day to give our respects and to honor a 14-year-old enslaved African-American drummer boy that bore no arms in the battle. His sole weapon against the British was his snare drum that he used masterfully and fearlessly to cheer on our soldiers. America has come a long way. We all had tears in our eyes. So here we are. Oops, there's some information on Jordan Noble. He did a whole lot of stuff. And here we have Al Jackson and the reenactor of Jordan Noble. And here we have Al Jackson and one of the descendants of Jordan Noble and the master of ceremony. And can we play this? This is a video. Can we play this? This is a drum roll for Jordan Noble. I'm not sure whether it's possible. They would have it up there. Okay, I guess it's not possible, so we let it. It was just the drum roll for him. I filmed the whole event, but my filming skills with an iPhone are not superior, so you understand. Okay, for today's lecture, I want to elaborate more on my research in the National Archives and show you more of the about 4,000 images that I took there. Well, that's what I wanted. Unfortunately, I don't have these images anymore. My iPad mini had a tragic accident and was run over by a truck. I took my beloved badly injured device immediately to the Mac shop, only to find out that none of my images had been saved on the iCloud, nor had they been synced into my iPhone as I had assumed. I don't know, technology is not on my side. Then I rushed it to a series of repair places, but all reviving efforts to bring the data back have failed so far. Luckily, I had created a data bank with the basic results in my computer before the accident occurred, which I still have and can share with you. I also have a few pictures. Okay. In addition, I want to shed some light today on a very prominent biracial Creole New Orleans family who stood out serving their city and their country in a war of 1812 and made a considerable contribution to Jackson's victory. While searching for the members of this family and their affiliates, I stumbled upon two interesting aspects of the war. Two factors Andrew Jackson had in his favor, two secret weapons, and my previous speaker had not mentioned those. So the British didn't have that, and we will see what that is. Okay, but first let us look again at the information of the muster rolls. See what the next one is. Aha, here is one of them. Okay, here is the muster roll. These are the few images I still have. This is the muster roll of the quartermaster. There's only one who got well paid, Joseph Cabaret. Okay, so I noticed that the numbers of how many actually served in the 1st and 2nd battalions of freemen of color vary considerably in the literature. There are no dispute as of who served as their leaders. Both battalions had a white man as their first major. Black men clearly could not be trusted to the extent that they had a leader of their own altogether. But their almost rank-even second major was a distinguished freeman of color. So we had two teams of 1st and 2nd major, and often the 2nd major was the more important one. The first one was just a friend who helped out, so to speak, to play along with the charade. So the 2nd major was a black man, the first one was a white man. So the 1st battalion was under the leadership of 1st Major Pierre Lacoste, who was white, and 2nd Major Vincent Populus, who was black. But he was the man really in charge, and he had recruited his men. Now, the archives proved that the two were seen more as a team at the same rank. Many talks. So both the 1st and the 2nd major worked at the same pay rate, earning a salary of $50 per month. This was the 2nd highest salary of anyone. So apparently there you can see that they were considered equal, so they had a team, which actually worked out well for them. The situation at the 2nd Battalion of Freemen of Color, also known as the Men from Saint-Domingue, was similar. Their first major was Louis Daquin, who was white, from Saint-Domingue, like everybody else, and his 2nd major was Joseph Savary. Now, Savary was a very interesting guy. He was a distinguished warrior on many accounts. He had already served the French army, and he also was very well established with the Barratarians, our privateers outside the city. So both were paid at the same rate. So as for the numbers, how many soldiers served under these leadership teams, the sources vary. Most recent publications believe them to be only about 180 and 150 respectively. Arsène Lacarrière-Latour, Jackson's legendary principal engineer, who wrote the earliest published account of the fateful battle entitled Historical Memoir of the War in West Florida and Louisiana in 1814, 1815, I guess everybody knows this one, offers a much higher number. He says that Lacoste's men consisted of 6 captains with about 60 men each. That comes up to more than 360 men. So that's what he says. Now, he was there. The muster rolls in the National Archives are a lot closer to Latour's recollections than they are to the other estimates. They can account for 337 men that formed this battalion. So, but there are some duplicates in there, and then there were some enslaved people that were included. They had between 10 and 20 enslaved servants included. So these guys came up in style. They came up in fancy clothes, and they came up with their servants and their horses, the officers. So no, these were not ragtag people from the street. So the records of the War of 1812 in Washington, I found out last year, are not kept as accurately as military records today. I believe some master roles have disappeared, maybe a whole lot of them. Then obviously they can't read French there, so I found plenty of duplicates. First of all, they told me those 2 battalions don't exist, they don't have any records. So I had to go with them in the archives back to find them for them because they didn't even know where they were. So it's a bit of a not good situation. And none of them are digitized. So maybe we have some money in the future to get it all done, and then we can bring it to our people. We would know what to do with it. So from the first glance at these battalions, it becomes instantly clear that they had percentage-wise an unusually large number of high-ranking and well-paid officers, especially the 1st Battalion of Freemen of Color under the command of Captain Pierre Lacoste. That battalion included many well-respected and combat-experienced former officers of the by then disbanded Spanish black militia units. The Spanish already had very active militia units. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an idea. We had, so the 1st and the 2nd major, we had a surgeon, we had the surgeon's mate. Now the assistant of the surgeon got a lot less paid than the surgeon. So that indicates that the 1st and the 2nd major were considered rank even, despite the fact that one was 1st, the other one was 2nd. Quartermeister is Joseph Cabaret that we have there. He received 40 per month, there's only one of them. We had an adjutant, we had 6 captains, just exactly like Latour said, and each of them received 40 per month. We had 9 first lieutenants, we had 5 second lieutenants, we had 1 third lieutenant, we have an ensign, we have 27 sergeants, we have 25 corporals, we have 11 musicians, 12 musicians, and they got paid better than the privates. They got $11. If they were senior musicians, they got 9 per month if they were regular musicians. The privates only got 8. Now, the musicians are interesting because in all other battalions that I looked in, even the 2nd Black Battalion, they had 1 drummer per captain, and that's it. So there were 5 captains in the 2nd one and 5 drummers, and they had 1-5. But they seem to have had a whole orchestra here in the Freemen of Color. Most of them were from Tremé. We have even some of the Black Tremé family members here. We have 2 musicians, one is Emile and the other one is Felix Tremé, so they were there. Then we have a whole lot of privates all together. Altogether, there are almost 250 privates. All of them were paid at the rate of $8 per month. And then there were also a considerable number of enslaved people. There were 21 servants listed in that 1st battalion, and some of them got paid the $8. Some of them, oops, what did I do? Okay. Some of them got paid the $8 on their own. Some of them got paid through the man that they were serving that brought them, and some of them didn't get paid. So what the system there was, go figure, this is still up to further research, but that they were there at all is rather surprising, because I didn't expect that. Okay. So I already told you about the musicians that were there. So they stood out. But this high number of incredible officers is completely unprecedented. There's no other unit I've seen that has even nearly as many officers. So here we are. There's Basile de Mazilier, also from Tremé. He's a captain, gets paid well. Here is his letter where everything is specified that was up with his service. Here's Félix Delisle. He was a private. He is related to Henriette Delisle, that we pray now for, that she will become soon a saint. So the Louisiana Territory had about 8,000 free persons of color. Most of them lived in New Orleans when the war erupted. And as the British approached, these people showed up. In fact, they were Andrew Jackson's favorite guys because he kept them longer than anyone else. He kept them well into March. So the master roles are interesting to see whom he liked and whom he didn't like. Even if they didn't stay, they got paid until the March 25th. So here is his famous proclamation. And that proclamation was not good because he promised them a lot more that they didn't get. He promised them bounty land and cash money. None of them got that. So here, as sons of freedom, you are called upon to defend our most estimable blessing. All right, well, he obviously knew that they were here. Oops. That they were here, you know, that they had lived here for several generations, and he appealed to them. What he was afraid of was that they would defect to the British, that they would cause problems like they did in Haiti, and you all know what happened to Napoleon's army in Haiti. So he was afraid of that, and that was why he wanted to make sure they are on the right side, on his side. That was before he had even met them. Okay, now Claiborne was another story. Our first governor was from Virginia, and that man really didn't know what to do with free men of color. He just hated them altogether. So the first thing he did was disband all our free black militia. Next thing he did was he had to, under pressure from everyone, he had to finally put them back into service and muster in free men of color, and that's the 2 battalions that we are talking about. Now, these efforts were not just the 2 battalions that I just talked to you about. There were also 2 smaller free black groups from Iberia Parish and Opelousas. And then there were 600 enslaved workers who were digging out the trenches and the fortifications on both sides of the river. So they apparently did all the work for the engineers that we're going to talk about. And no, none of them got free either. So let's see, here's the battlefield, and the battlefield also doesn't show any black people on either side. There were a lot of black people also among the British from Jamaica. Here's the battlefield, and here we have them. You can see it better here. There they are. We have here, next to Ploches, we have Lacostes, and we have them right here. So they were kind of in the middle. They were frustrated. They wanted more action. Some of them were said to have gone over the fortifications and started just attacking and just to get a few shots as well. Okay, so they also were pretty highly represented among the casualties. They say 1/3 of the casualties were African American. Okay. Yes, the 1st battalion, we'll see here, they all were mustered in December 16th, discharged March 25th. Now, mustered in December 16th, that's interesting, that's the day that nobody was mustered in. So this is just a fictive day. But March 25th, I didn't find any other unit that was disbanded this late. So they were under these 2 leaders. And here we have the pay rate that I just told you about. Top guy got 50. Forchier, who was formerly in charge, got 60. He was the only one. And the surgeon got 60. Everyone else was lower. And most of them were just privates. Interestingly, even among the privates were some of our great Spanish former officers. So this was not reflecting the skills altogether. This reflected, I don't know what, you know, who knew whom or who wanted to do what, but it doesn't reflect altogether their skills. So now we've heard a lot of discussion throughout this conference. You know, what happened? Why was it that Andrew Jackson could pull this thing off, you know? Was it the Tennessean and Kentuckian rifles that aimed more precisely? Was it the artillery that the Brits had too heavy artillery they couldn't maneuver in the swampy land? Was it because Jackson was so determined, you know? For him it was payback time, you know, he hated the British more than anyone else probably on earth, and for him he was determined, they're not gonna win. So, or was it the vigilante warfare? We talked about all of those, and you know, the vigilante warfare, you know, tomahawk throwing. Let's see what I have. The musicians again. We have here the musicians. Yeah, the Baptiste family was already there in the Battle of New Orleans, and now here is Lionel Baptiste, who had passed away. Well, the most famous Baptiste member of that family right now is in New York. He is John Baptiste, who is on the Stephen Colbert show from New Orleans. So they're still very important. Oops. So here's a little quote here. The lines of the Orleans battalions played Yankee Doodle. So these musicians were active. It was probably not the Orleans battalion, but right next to it was the free men of color that were doing all the noise. So we know this battle had, you know, Shakespearean, almost Shakespearean, it was almost Shakespearean in its final epic crescendo. That's what I read in, don't want to make a mistake here. The book is called Patriotic Fire, okay, Winston Groom. All right, now I lost my, technology is not on my side. I lost the, okay. Here we go. So this is an interesting quote that he wrote in his prologue. When the battle ended, the American civilian soldiers from the Southland had held the field against a trained and experienced British army, a force conceded by everyone to be the best in the world. Okay, men who had arrived riding the crest of recent victories over Napoleon's fabled legions, men who had won over the feeble American militia and burned down the American capital in Washington, an enemy that had crossed the Atlantic with all the accumulated knowledge of its civilization to crush the upstart Americans. So we know the scenario all too well. Here were the well-trained, famous British who came with all their knowledge, and on the other side, this great force was defeated by men wearing rags, divided as dirty shirts, men without proper military training and weapons, scorned as the scum of the earth, men who had no mirror to hold up against the future as they faced the Duke of Wellington's smartly attired, red-coated veterans. Well, all right then, you know, is that really true? So I was starting to look into that. This is kind of the stereotype, right? Here we have ragtag and ragtag. Doesn't look like a well-trained army. Well, first of all, is the miracle of the 8th January really an accurate description of what happened? We hear over and over again the same David versus Goliath-like scenario. On one side, the motley American crew of ragtag, inexperienced, dirty shirts who ended up surprising everyone by beating the famed and feared British redcoats, the best trained, most experienced, and best equipped army in the whole world. Okay, you know the scenario, you know what I'm talking about. We had the alligators as cannons, right? If you don't believe the alligators were really cannons, like Jimmy Horton's song describes, what might have been really a more accurate description? Well, when we think of these soldiers here, they may have had a whole lot more experience than they look like. They may have had many, many battles behind them. They may know more about strategy in the terrain here in North America than any of those redcoats, because they're not from here. So experience doesn't necessarily show in the clothes. Neither does your bravery, nor does your organization. None of that shows in the clothes. So this may not be totally accurate. The Tennesseans and Kentucky militiamen who may have qualified for their characterization, dirty shirts, here I have a dirty shirt for you. But even most of them had combat experience. With Indian wars or just hunting experience, they were used to hunting in the wild, which requires similar skills as warfare. They may not have been all that terribly inexperienced as we always hear, you know? People think of military historians and then they forget these guys have a military past too. It's not as formal, but it may be quite audacious and quite substantial. Now, when it comes to the freemen of color, there's a different story altogether. Their shirts were definitely not dirty. They must have been freshly ironed and good looking. Probably they also had nice warm overcoats and wore elegant boots. They had excellent tailors and shoemakers among them, and they were hardly appearing in rags. We don't have pictures of them, but I don't visualize any one of them in a rag. Their officers brought their own horses and enslaved servants with them, and lacking skills, being poorly trained, poorly equipped is definitely not an accurate description of their skills, experience, and anything they represented. They were seasoned, highly trained, polished, and combat experienced officers. Many of them already served in the Spanish army. Andrew Jackson noticed that apparently very quickly. They had also highly educated people among them. Wealthy men, craftsmen, merchants, teachers, and very rich real estate investors. Finally, they had a lot of these combat experienced Barratarian smugglers and privateers. Then also they had combat experienced veterans of the Haitian Independence War. No, they were not an unexperienced ragtag bunch, not true. So, but it's probably racial stereotypes and complete ignorance of our highly sophisticated and well-to-do black aristocrats, the gens de couleur libre, as they call themselves, the free men of color, or free people of color, who may have not been clearly seen by some historians. Historians may not be familiar with this section of our peculiar Louisiana population and may have had the wrong ideas of them. He quickly learned that those people were not what he expected. Now, besides these free men of color that I described with you in every way I could, we also have another two secret weapons. When I looked for these free men of color, I found that Andrew Jackson had two other secret weapons. One, he had superior engineers to any of the Brits. And the second one is he had, and that will surprise you, your mama and them. You all know what that is, okay. Let's look into the engineers. Okay. There are many books written about Marie Laveau and even many, 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 many more about our pirates, but there's nothing written about these, the second of these famous engineers. So you see, Andrew Jackson, surprise, surprise, did not have one, but two of these engineers on his side. And that's very interesting. They often get confused with each other, and there were actually two. Both of them were short, smart, incredibly sharp, spoke many, many languages fluently, were highly, highly educated, and were engineers and architects like we have rarely ever seen since, and you all know we have absolutely amazing architects here. So they were a very interesting bunch. Arsène Lacaillère-Latour was always described as a little sharp Frenchman, or that was kind of the description, comes up in all the books. This little sharp Frenchman had another one with him, another little sharp Frenchman. They were about 5'1", were both from the south of France, probably had, when they spoke French, incredible accents. This guy here is from Aurillac. Latour is from Aurillac in the Auvergne, from a small place. This one here is from Villepinte near Castelnaudary. This is the Department de l'Aude. That's in Languedoc. That's towards the Spanish border. So they both had strange accents for French standards, and they both came from lower nobility in their small towns, where their family had served for generations in all kinds of public offices. Now, they had more in common. The two of them, and you see he is a lot younger, he's about 9 years younger than Lafont. Latour and both Lafont were Baratarians, quite frequently. They were before the battle and after the battle constantly involved with the Laffittes. However, this one got away that he looked like he's clean. This one did not. This one got caught. So when I tried to figure out why he didn't get the job of the first engineer, it occurred to me that the connection with the Baratarians was probably the likely factor. Because if I was Andrew Jackson, I would have chosen him. We have another factor, Livingston. Edward Livingston was friends with the both of them. So, and of course with the pirates. So he recommended this one to Andrew Jackson. Why? Well, he had no choice. Why would I have recommended this one to Andrew Jackson? This one had been here all along. He was until 1813 the first principal engineer of our troops here. He was since in 1806 the major surveyor. And when Latour came to town, he joined his firm. So there is now books written, but pretty much all the buildings that are attributed to him were actually also connected to him. So I have to do a lot more archival research to figure out what was really going on here. But apparently these two are constantly mistaken for each other and appear under each other's resume. Now, why do I think he was better? Well, he was here longer. He had his plantation out there here in Saint Bernard Parish. He knew the terrain like nobody else, and he knew also the waterways like no one else. So now, why would Andrew Jackson give the job to Latour? Very simply, he had no choice. When he came to town December 1st, he had to act quickly. By December 16th, he declares martial law. Well, at that point, he had to give the job to Latour because poor Lafont was at that point in disgrace. The guy had made a faux pas. He was caught with other big Baratarians in September of 1814 in Grand Isle, and they all were locked up in the jail right behind the Cabildo, in the Calabozo. So he couldn't give it to them because poor Lafont was out of graces at that point. The Latour was not at that expedition in Grand Isle, so he stayed clean, so they could give the job to him. But from what I see, when I read the memoirs of Latour, I see Lafont always right next to him, watching him over the shoulder, and they plan everything together. So here we go. Jackson declares martial law. The next day, he gives Latour the appointment and puts him immediately to work. He has to go to Fort St. Philip to fortify the fort. And the next day he meets with Jean Lafitte to clear the West because he realized very quickly, my best men are in jail and I need them on my battle line. So then the next day we have the famous parade where all the troops are mustered in. So that solves the mystery. Okay, we have the next point very quickly. Secret weapon number 2, your mama and them. Wow. Well, when we meet each other, you all know, and I make this quickly, very quickly. When we meet, the first thing we always say, hey, how you doing, right? Next thing is, how's your mama and them, right? Well, your mama and them in New Orleans means your family. And here is, I think, where the motive of our free men of color and our local New Orleans troops was a lot different from Andrew Jackson. Yes, Andrew Jackson hated those British like no one else. But his Rachel and his children were on the Hermitage in Tennessee in safety. He didn't have to worry about his family. Our troops very much so had to worry about your mom and them, their wives and children and everyone. And in New Orleans, we're all related. These troops can be brothers, can be uncles, can be anything in New Orleans. So yes, these families came out in clans. Vincent Populus, the second major of the 1st battalion, came with 9 other members of his family. And they were close friends of the Lafonts, by the way. Now, Lafont's partner for 20 years, until death parted them, was a free woman of color. Not only Lafitte dated free ladies of color, Lafont also did. Lafont had Modeste Fouché at his side. The two were madly in love with each other and did business together and did anything together. So, but he couldn't marry her according to our laws. They had 4 kids and he did anything he could for them. Furthermore, the commitment to his family, we also see how he takes care of his black in-laws. When Modeste's mama died, he takes care of the siblings of Modeste. Now, some more interesting facts. Remember Major Lacoste, who is the first major, a white man, you think, Pierre Lacoste. Well, his significant other was what? Josephine Lacoste or Josephine Fouché. She was directly related, same family as Modeste Fouché. So there was family. The whole battalion was family. Now, when you read the memoirs of Latour, you find on December 26, Latour, and he doesn't say who else was with him, but he was with a man of Lacoste. They all were trying to chase the British to prevent them from coming through Chef Mentor Highway into the city. So when they come up the highway, somehow they end up all on Lafont's plantation nearby. And then it's a fabulous description. Latour is completely delighted how they show what they can to the Brits. And he said he's so happy. I'm sorry, I just disrespectful for the British famous units, but it's amazing how he delights in the fact that a much smaller number of people could so impose on a much larger of soldiers, the British, and make them chase away. So he was already then on December 6, completely confident that they would win. Now Arsène Latour was surrounded by his friends and family on both sides of the color line. Not only did Lafont bring his friends, he also brought some family. Modeste Fouché's younger brother, older brother, and 3 nephews were also in that battalion of women of color. So you see, it was a family affair altogether. Concluding, it makes a difference when you fight with a purpose, saying your Hail Marys to get God, the Holy Mother, and the saints on your side, because you have to defend your mama and them. Then, if you are simply a well-trained soldier in a mighty army who only fights for a meager salary or professional ambitions. Thank you.